Hey everybody, this is Rick Gerke back at you for episode 2 of Safe, Green, and Happy. Last time, we looked at ISO 14001:2015 and the new requirements around context, and some considerations to take into account for determining context. For this session, we're going to look at ways to use that knowledge of our context and combine it with the principles of sustainability to help us choose meaningful objectives to improve our environmental performance. One of the aims of ISO 14001 is to help organizations manage their business in a way that supports the environmental pillar of sustainability. Typically, sustainability is described as having 3 pillars: economy, society, and environment. Some models use more pillars. I'm okay with 3, but whatever. Since we're talking about ISO 14001, the main focus here is on the environmental pillar, but they're all interrelated. There are no actual requirements for sustainability or sustainable development in the standard. Other than a mention in Clause 5.2 on environmental policy, the requirements section of the standard doesn't even mention the word. The word comes up in the introduction and in the scope, and once in the annex where the standard talks about the 3 pillars of sustainability. Our society's expectations for sustainability are increasing as people learn more about it. We don't have to become sustainable with regard to any particular environmental aspect, but it can make a really good objective. So, what does sustainable mean? We hear the word a lot these days, but what is it? Does recycling my beer bottles make me sustainable? Does a low-flow toilet in my bathroom make me sustainable? How about installing low-wattage lighting? These things can all contribute to sustainability, but they're not the destination, just part of the vehicle. One definition for sustainability is the ability to continue a defined behavior indefinitely. For the purposes of environmental management, I like the Brundtland Commission report from way back in the 1980s, which states, "Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs." Note that this definition uses the word needs, not wants. Needs and wants aren't the same thing, although sometimes it feels that way. If we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere faster than photosynthesis can pull it out, that's not sustainable. If we're using helium in our processes and letting it go when we're done, that's not sustainable. When it's gone, it's gone. There are some things we're doing to maintain and improve our standard of living that are just not sustainable. We have over 7 billion people sharing this planet with conflicting priorities, wants, needs, and so on. I'm not here trying to start any arguments or political debates, just to talk about ISO 14001. We all have a different set of values and priorities and our own ideas on what things are needs and what things are wants. Unfortunately, because of our big brains, clever hands, and powerful ambition, nature has taught us some hard lessons. Nature decides what's environmentally sustainable and what isn't. Nature doesn't compromise or negotiate, it just responds. Our opportunity here is to improve our understanding of nature and our relationship to it. Sustainability and context helps us get that understanding and use it in our management systems. If we want to say that we've achieved sustainability with regard to some environmental aspect, we need a frame of reference. The frame of reference is context. Now let's look at some sustainability basics. The word gets tossed around so much, is so widely used in so many ways that it's in danger of losing its meaning. We can give it meaning by incorporating context. So now, let's talk about context-based sustainability. It's a bit of a tongue twister, so for the purposes of pronounceability, we could also say sustainability in context. Here's a simplified example. One of my many dream jobs is to build a brewery. Yes, beer is a want, not a need, although I tend to think of it as one. We could live without it, but let's say, just for the sake of examples, that we're going to have it one way or another, but we choose to do it sustainably. This, by the way, is a Big River IPA, locally made here in Chattanooga where I live, and I try to get these things locally as much as possible, just to cut down the environmental impacts of transportation. To make beer, I need things like yeast, hops, barley, water, and all kinds of other stuff like equipment, space, electricity, personnel, and everything else that you need to make beer. But for this example, I'm going to focus on one environmental aspect, and that's water use. Everyone needs water. Water for drinking, water for washing, water for irrigation, cooking, manufacturing, and all those other things that we use water for. In my hypothetical brewery, we use water that goes into the product, we use water to clean the equipment, we use water for the kitchen, the restrooms, and so on, and we send out beer, wastewater, and we have some evaporative loss. There's also some water use going on in the facility that we probably don't think about very often, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. With our current process, counting everything we're using water for, let's say for the sake of this example that we're getting a water use ratio of 6:1. In other words, it takes us 6 gallons of water used to make 1 gallon of finished beer. That's called normalizing. In other words, not just how much water we're using, but what are we getting out of it. We need this normalized metric to help us measure our environmental performance. Again, for the purposes of the example, our base water usage ratio is 6:1. Okay, so back to sustainability. To paraphrase the Brundtland Commission definition of sustainability, we want to be able to make beer today without compromising the needs of other interested parties, including future generations, to meet their own water needs. Next time you're going through and reviewing your interested party list, see if you've got future generations on there anywhere. Using our normalized metric, we know what our own current needs are. We need 6 gallons of water for every gallon of beer we're going to ship out. But we're going for sustainability now. We've identified water use as a significant environmental aspect. We see an opportunity to do better, and we have some ideas about how we can do it. But since we're going for sustainability, we need a valid objective. How do we know what the needs are of people around us? How do we know what the water needs of future generations are? That's context. So how do we find out what other people need? We gather data, for example, on population, consumption, current water use, and other factors. To choose a good target number for sustainable water use at our hypothetical brewery, we need to find out basically what's our sustainable share of the available supply. Using that knowledge about our sustainable share, we want to translate it into the same normalized metric that we're using to measure our water performance. In other words, gallons of water used per gallon of beer produced. Being based in the Tennessee River watershed, I have some good data sources available, including the Tennessee Valley Authority, Appalachian Regional Commission, Environmental Protection Agency, the University of Tennessee, and lots more. Given all the factors that determine our fair sustainable share, using the best available information now, let's say for the purposes of this example, we find out that we need to achieve a water performance ratio of 4:1 to hit that sustainability target. In other words, we need to make a gallon of beer using only 4 gallons of water. So that's our target, 4:1. This is an extremely simplified example. Going through the exercise for real is going to be a serious project. I'm just describing the idea. So, here we are, happily brewing away with a baseline performance of 6:1, shooting for an environmental sustainability target of 4:1. That's our objective, the result to be achieved. Now that we have an objective, we're ready to make our plans to achieve it. After some brainstorming with the team, we identify a list of things that are either within our resources now or they will be within our planning time frame. We are a business, so we have to make our environmental objectives and plans consistent with our other business priorities. Pulling together our enthusiastic and dedicated management team and using ideas generated by the whole workforce, we come up with a list of projects. For example, implementing a new preventive maintenance program for fixing and preventing leaks, optimizing our cleaning cycle by process improvement, putting together a project to capture rainwater and air conditioning condensate, installing low-flow fixtures for the facility restrooms, installing equipment for on-site treatment and reuse of cleaning water, and installing water-efficient landscaping. Now we're keeping track as we implement these programs to find out whether we're getting any actual performance improvement, and we're using our utility bills to find out, yes, we are actually making progress, but we're not quite there yet. We need another project. Here's an example of the interrelationship between a couple of critical resources, water and electricity. According to NREL, or the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, it takes 2 gallons of evaporated water for every kilowatt hour of electricity consumed at the point of use. That's a lot of water. For example, running a 100-watt light bulb for 10 hours uses 2 gallons of water in addition to the other environmental impacts. The water cost of generating electricity is another element of our context. We can also look into other indirect uses of water. Google it sometime, it's an eye-opener. Now, our enthusiastic green team has been looking into installing solar panels and motion sensor lighting to help reduce our energy footprint. This is a good objective by itself, but in this case, because of the interrelationship between water and electricity, we get to double dip. At this point, we have the data to calculate how many kilowatt hours of electricity use we need to eliminate in order to close the final gap towards sustainability and water use. In this example, at the end of year 2, we reached our sustainability objective of 4:1, 4 gallons of water used per gallon of beer finished and enjoyed. Depending on conditions, our target may have moved since we started this whole project. Environmental conditions change. Same thing goes for other conditions that are part of our context, such as population and climate. Remember that the definition of sustainability includes future generations as well, so to remain sustainable, we'll want to keep reviewing our context and reviewing our performance. This idea of sustainability and context will probably be important to you if your organization participates in the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, or the Global Reporting Initiative, or some other sustainability reporting framework. As we approach our objective of sustainable water use, we want to be looking at new environmental objectives. As an organization that wants to improve, wants to be sustainable, we need to keep looking for new objectives that are consistent with our policy commitment to continual improvement. Once we've pursued an objective to some logical limit, we need to pick some new ones in order to keep improving our environmental performance. Time to go back to that aspect list and find some new opportunities. That's it for today. If you have some topic you'd like to see addressed in a future video on ISO 14001, OSAS 18001, ISO 50001, or some other standard, please give me a shout. Until next time, be safe, be green, and be happy.